Welcome everyone to another episode of Aging in Action, and we're very happy to have with us today Anthony Bozzo with Shield Engineering. And Anthony, you're a structural engineer, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Welcome, Anthony.
Anthony. Well, this is an interesting topic, and we had coffee the other day just to chat about it because it's something that comes up in my world fairly often, and we're talking about secondary units. Because there's been some changes to what people are allowed to do now. Maybe just chat a little bit about yourself and just bring us up to date.
Okay, so like Gwen said, my name is Anthony Bozzo. I was born and raised in Sudbury. Went away to Ottawa for my schooling years to get to my civil engineering degree and specialize in structural engineering. My work experience kind of goes along the lines of consulting engineering. I did a bit of work in construction and working for the owner in one of the mining companies here in town as well, and kind of full circle back into consulting and dealing a lot with residential type work. And I've been loving it so far. I've been with Shield for about 10 months. And I'd say my main focus is residential market jobs.
So what is a secondary unit? Because we keep hearing about these things, and in my world, oftentimes there's lots of what we call in-law suites, which to most realtors, that's code for you didn't get a permit. So what has changed with the municipalities now in regards to a secondary unit?
So it's kind of funny, and I know there was an article put out by I think Sudbury.com and getting the city to comment on it because of the new bill that's being passed in Ontario to solve the housing crisis. But in reality, I think it was 2016 that Sudbury passed the new bylaw that secondary units were permitted. And then more recently to that, a third unit on a single property is now permitted. So yes, like you said, granny suites or in-law suites kind of had that connotation of being there, but not a legal unit. And I think the push to have a secondary unit is to make it a legal dwelling within an existing property. So, a secondary dwelling unit is basically just a secondary living space that's part of a house, whether it's attached to the house or an accessory building, and it's a legal space.
That has all the code regulations, right? Because you have to do things to today's building code, and that's very in depth, and it's really, to make things safe, right, for people. Fire safety is a big one.
Yeah, fire safety is definitely a big factor, and egress requirements definitely. Yeah.
So if I'm an individual in the community, and I'll use myself as an Asian, it's all right. My kids aren't going to watch the episode. No, all of a sudden I decide, my husband passes away, we're an aging demographic, retired, and we want our kids say, hey, why don't you come and live with us? Move in. What would be the first thing as, just someone in the community that they should do wherever they live to say, okay, we want to maybe externally build something, or maybe, like you say, an in-law suite and house? What should be that first step that homeowner should think about doing?
To either build onto or well, in Sudbury in particular, actually a lot of the information that I'm getting for this interview is available right on the Sudbury's building services website.
Okay.
For these secondary units. So it's kind of a guideline for homeowners to see what's required. And it would be kind of that first step to see if it is a possibility for your property, and then contacting building services to get the right direction, or contacting, construction professionals or design professionals like myself to see if it's a possibility and how to get, the drawing package together to do that.
So you say on our Greater Sudbury website, so if we were broadcasting in Timmins or North Bay municipality wise, it would change that depending on the community, right?
Yes, I think that Ontario-wide now, there are very similar requirements.
Okay.
But specifically to Sudbury, it would be to go see that guideline. And I mean, Ontario building code requirements are same across the board here in Ontario. So I would assume that a lot of the same communities are going to be taking up the same policies.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry. So I have a question. So, about size and restrictions. So I know, where Joy lives, she has a little bit of a smaller backyard than I have. So where I live, I have a few acres. So is that saying now that the guidelines say that I could just decide to build a full-fledged secondary home in my backyard? Or is there size restrictions and
Yeah, so
all this?
there's size restrictions, per zone in the municipality. You have a certain lot coverage restriction. So if you're already kind of tapped out in terms of that on a smaller property, then likely an accessory structure or a detached structure is not going to be the right move. But if you have acreage, I think it's up to 40%, 10%, depending on the type of zone that you can have as a lot coverage. So detached structure is definitely a possibility. Some of the requirements, though, like I know there are some zoning restrictions, such as like it has to be a permitted residential occupancy. And the secondary dwelling unit needs to be at least 10% smaller than the main building.
Okay, yeah, so you can't be building another 3,000 square foot house if the one that's already existing is a 2,000 square foot house or
Exactly.
something. Yeah, okay.
And then the other restriction, I don't know to full details and if anyone's tried to sever after the fact, but basically say that if you have, say, acreage or a large enough property that can be severed, that the secondary dwelling unit cannot be used as a primary unit, as a primary dwelling unit on the property.
Oftentimes we see, like bungalows, they're fairly easy to put a basement unit, possibly, but also that you could get into height issues sometimes in older properties where basically that was like a cellar. It wasn't really meant to have a rec room in a secondary unit. So sometimes there's height requirements too, isn't there, with when you're starting to want to put in a self-contained unit there?
Yes, definitely. So just for background information, in the building code, there's Part 9 that kind of governs what the residential use dictates for construction. But if it's an existing building that's been around for more than 5 years, then we have access to Part 11 of the building code for renovation purposes. So we do have a bit more leeway in terms of what we can get away with, I guess, to not meet the full Part 9. But say if you were building an accessory structure, so like a tiny home in your backyard, it would need to meet Part 9 of the code. So to what you were saying, Gwen, for height restrictions, Part 9 would dictate a certain height, and Part 11 would allow probably something a bit less than what was required. But I have seen that in the past where we're working with heights that don't meet code and it wouldn't pass as a legal unit.
Almost like you go in some places because they were built a long time ago and they're almost like little hobbit places, right? You could barely stand up. Somebody 6 feet tall wouldn't even be able to stand in some basements that I've seen. So yeah, it's sometimes very shocking what I see out there in terms of what people have all done, and obviously not with permits, but that's, and one of the things I was intrigued by too was the tiny home that you showed me that you had built, and there's lots of talk about tiny homes, and the one I saw that you were involved with, I thought, wow, that's really cool, because it kind of looked like it was right in Sudbury on rock, but it looked like it was this cabin in the bush. It was really designed well from what I could see from the outside, and I thought that's a very interesting thing, because you think sometimes you can't do a lot of things within the city because of the rock limitations, but there's so much more I guess expertise now in how to build something in that type of a location, right? So you don't necessarily have to write off something, right? Maybe you can do it, right? With the right help.
Yeah, so for that property in particular, you know, the size of the property was decent. From, you know, if you were to look at the property before the tiny home was there, you probably said there's no way that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the lot coverage, we were good, and yeah, it serves the purpose for the client and the homeowner, having someone that's nearby and they can, you know, look after them.
Yeah.
The backyard.
So are you seeing more of that, Anthony, right now in the Greater Sudbury region, where more individuals have smaller pieces of land or property and they're building that, as Gwen said, that tiny home model?
I'd say that the tiny home as a secondary unit is not as common as either building an addition to an existing house, or having that basement unit. I'd say the basement units are a lot more common, a lot less involved in terms of construction and overall cost, I would say.
Gwen, you kind of made a reference to, you know, your experience. So I guess I turn the table a little bit on that one now. What if you're a seller and you don't use a realtor? You're using, I don't know, marketing on your own and selling it. So I'm the buyer coming in. I see there's like maybe an in-law suite, or, you know, like Anthony made, you know, a structural outside. As a buyer, and if it's a seller isn't using a realtor who, you know, someone like Gwen who's like deep dive, does her job well, would I be best maybe to reach out to a structural engineer, someone within like your organization, to say, hey, we're looking at purchasing this property. Can you make sure it was done legally? Is that something you can do within your organization?
Well, I would just, sorry, as a realtor, I would also suggest that you talk to your lawyer.
Well, yeah, there's always that. Call Jordan first.
Because it can get complicated if there is already an existing tenant living in an illegal apartment. So things aren't necessarily black and white, but I'll let Anthony also address, you know, being a consultant in that situation too.
Well, for these secondary units, the city actually makes you register them with the city. I don't have personal experience in doing that, but I know through clients and contractors that I've worked with that is the process. So if you were going through a sale and it wasn't registered, I would say that it's likely not legal. But not to say that, you know, going through the steps to do it would be impossible, but I would say that it would be costly, as opposed to if it was registered, then you would know and you'd have that peace of mind.
So I have a question. Sorry, Gwen. So I know the city is encouraging secondary units and things like that. And I think in the past, a lot of people weren't talking about them. They were just doing them to avoid having to get permits. But I think also avoiding a huge tax increase on their homes. So has the government or the city accommodated for that in our community to allow for a second home without incurring a large cost of, you know, more taxes and all that kind of stuff?
I wouldn't be able to comment on how much the taxes would increase, but as with any improvements to your home, I mean, it is subject to valuation increase, or at least a reassessment from MPAC. And typically when the building permit is applied for, it kind of flags the municipality and MPAC, and likely they would come and do their visit during construction. I mean, as to how much it would increase, I don't know if it's a direct correlation to how much the perceived value increase would be. And I don't know, like I said, I don't have that experience to know how much of a break, I guess, it would be.
I think, yeah, they're definitely for sure would be reassessed based on what's there, and they would evaluate it, you know, in like comparable properties, that sort of thing. But I think overall, especially now with what it's costing for a senior in particular to look at a you know, senior's residence, and you're typically talking 4,000 and up a month, it definitely would probably be cost effective if that's, you know, what the family thinks would be a good thing to do, right? Because not everybody can do this. Not everybody can share their home again with mom and dad or whoever. And but I think, and it isn't necessarily either the senior. It could be that the senior's already living there and they want to make a space for the young couple, or you know, for somebody to live with them. So I think it may be cost effective if you, I definitely think it would be cost effective if somebody's looking at doing something like that to keep people together, because it is getting so expensive.
And the properties may not be available either, right? Like the availability of purchasing is diminishing. You know, the new builds are maybe outside the scope
So,
of reality for the buyer. So I think it's a nice fit, and just do it legally.
yeah. Well, big time, what really impacts me is safety, right? Because a lot of these units, they may have even been done by a contractor or somebody that knows some things about construction, but there's more involved. It's not just putting a kitchenette in there or whatever, right, Anthony? It's also about like egress windows. Maybe tell us, what are egress windows? What does that mean?
So specifically for the basement secondary unit, if it doesn't have a walkout on the level of the basement, of the floor where the unit is, and then the egress is through, you know, stairs to get to your egress door. In order to accommodate for safety, the building code requires that an egress window would be in the bedroom of that level, so that in case of a fire, you could get out and not have to use the stairs. So the code has specific requirements for, you know, the size and you know, the use of that type of window, and it's very specific to be part of that installation. But you know, so, and that's a big factor that comes into play when having to do the construction to get these secondary units up to code, is you know, not just the egress window, but the actual size of the windows, because the building code has requirements for window area to the floor space area. And as mentioned before, Part 11 allows for a bit more leeway in terms of the size requirements, but it's still, a lot of times, you know, basements are usually pretty dark, and the required lighting from a window in a living room space is such that, you know, your windows would likely have to be increased in size, and sometimes that's not very easy to do. Another thing that I've seen is you know, stairs to basements don't necessarily meet code, and if they're being used as an egress point, then we need to bring them up to code and make sure that we have the right head clearance and you know, rise and run, so that they're meeting the right requirements for building code.
Yeah, it's important for sure, because actually I just saw something advertised on Facebook the other day with 2 bedrooms and they didn't have windows. They actually took that picture. And I thought, okay. And it's all about what happens if there's a fire in one of the units.
Mhm.
You prevent it from spreading and all of that. So, but the idea, definitely, we need more housing, and how are we going to do that? And sometimes the best way to do it is deal with what you've already got, rather than trying to, go out there and find a piece of land and, then build it the way you want it. And I'm all for that too, if you want to, but sometimes you just got to look where you are, and maybe you can, and then it takes somebody like you, to come up with a design that says, okay, this works for our family. This is what's going to be the best thing. And dealing with an engineer, what's required, what's going to make that place safe and functioning, and that everybody goes on with their life,
So Anthony, I guess that's the next piece of the question is, if an individual is looking to maybe look at that secondary, they can reach out to Shield to yourself and say, hey, can you come in and give us a helping hand here? Let's figure out what I need to do to make it safe, make it legal, figure out those cost factors, and then build it in accordingly. So that, I guess, would be one of the things they would do, is reach out to your organization to say, hey, can we hire your firm to help us build this service or product, whatever that is that they need to do?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Typically, when clients reach out to have this done for their property, we'll provide a quote, and first step is to do a site visit to go and take measurements of the existing building and to see what we're working with. And at that point, I'd be able to give the homeowner, property manager, whatever, an idea of the amount of work that's going to be involved. Especially when looking at those aspects like the windows and the stairs, like I mentioned.
You mentioned the stairs, and I can speak from experience. Just recently, if we would have done it ourselves, we would have did the stairs, put a handrail for mobility for myself, and that would have been done. We actually hired a contractor in that process, learned that we couldn't do what we thought we could do because it wasn't legal. Right? Having the handrails at a certain height where it extended out and all those little pieces. So it does make sense, hire the professionals because they have the know. We're coming down to the last minute, Anthony, of taping. Is there any other words of wisdom you'd like to share before we finish off today's episode? We're throwing you under the bus. No, it's all right, Anthony. What we're going to do is share everything we can in regards to your organization, your contact information. And actually, I think it's a really great point that you brought up. Our City of Greater Sudbury has some of those bylaws and legislative component. It's readily there, available to all of the, us individuals in our communities. So we'll definitely share everything we can to all our viewers and listeners. We thank you so much, Anthony, for spending the time with us today. It's been really engaging. And I think as many of us are aging, or like you say, Gwen, the multiple families, we're looking at how we can, do some cost saving factors involved there as we're getting a little older. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Aging in Action. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you.